Take it there? Who gon' take it there? Who gon' take it there? Who gon' take it there? Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
Something that I want to talk about that some of you guys might have missed. I've seen a decent amount of chatter about it. Some of you guys, I imagine, don't know who this person is that I'm going to talk about, but a lot of you probably do. She's a popular kids YouTuber named Miss Rachel. She makes content and songs for kids. She started around 2019 doing these songs and doing YouTube content, and she has blown up. And what happens with these kids content creators when they catch fire like that is it becomes like so ubiquitous because it's something that kids naturally find their way to, or they see it somewhere, or their parents put on for them. So I imagine a lot of you guys have heard of Miss Rachel before this, despite the fact that she's been doing what she's doing for a pretty short amount of time. She's huge, and you know, she makes charming songs for kids or whatever, you know, kind of Mr. Rogers style stuff. And so she is accused by an organization, a pro-Israel organization, of essentially being supported by Hamas because she has made a lot of posts talking about Palestinian children, specifically Palestinian children starving, being killed, the amount of children that have been killed by Israel, and, you know, a few claims regarding that. Not really getting deep into the subject, but just blasting out to her followers, you know, these realities, whether it be an image of a child or she saw something about an image of a child that inspired her to speak out against the murder of children in Gaza. And so because of this, Stop Antisemitism is going after her. And Stop Antisemitism, essentially they are an organization that operates similarly to something like Libs of TikTok, where they target people. They find somebody like this, especially somebody influential, who is saying anything that goes against the narrative of Israel at all, and accuses them of anti-Semitism and essentially weaponizes anti-Semitism against them to silence them. Or in this case, what Stop Antisemitism did is request the DOJ, Pam Bondi, to investigate Miss Rachel under the pretense that she is accepting money from a foreign government. So that was the accusation that was made by Stop Antisemitism, which is actually a misapplication of that particular law because Hamas is not a government under that definition. And so the kind of terrorism that Stop Antisemitism wants Ms. Rachel to be charged with, even in some hypothetical world where she's receiving funding from Hamas, even what these Stop Antisemitism people have accused her of is not a case that would hold up. Obviously, this Justice Department doesn't give a fuck about that at all, and they're going to go after people even if there's no pretense at all for any criminal charges. They just want to fuck with people. They want to get people tied up in court. They want to get people deported without due process. That's their goal. So Stop Antisemitism knows this when they are trying to sick the dogs and get the attention of the Department of Justice on Miss Rachel. Because, I mean, the idea that she's accepting money from Hamas is absolutely ridiculous, patently absurd. And the accusation that comes from Stop Antisemitism is like, we noticed that ever since October 7th, she's been posting a lot of pro-Palestine content. She's been posting a lot of these things about children being killed in Palestine. That's curious. That's odd. That's suspicious. And it's like, well, yeah, ever since October 7th, Israel has been murdering children by the thousands on a pretty much daily basis. And that's probably why she's been talking about that consistently, is because it's been consistently happening, and images and proof, and not just figures that come from the Palestinian Ministry of Health or other sources like the UN that are used to corroborate those type of things, but just the reality we can see with our own eyes. There's no shortage of videos of entire cities, entire towns, villages blown apart, human beings blown apart, and all kinds of stuff like that. It's endless. And so all this shows is that Miss Rachel is tapped into that, and that she is paying attention to what's happening in the world, and so she is speaking to the reality of that rather than accepting a watered down version that you might get through mainstream media or something that is, there to whitewash the actions of Israel and the overt complicity of the United States. And so that type of speech, whether it comes from Mr. Rogers or Miss Rachel or Eb&Flow or Mahmoud Khalil or whoever it is, that type of speech is effectively illegal under Donald Trump, or at least they want it to be, and they're going to treat it like it is. And so that's the goal of Stop Anti-Semitism in, like I said, sicking the dogs on Miss Rachel. I'm sure they would be happy to have her deported to El Salvador or somewhere like that, because that's really what we're dealing with here, is you have a psychopathic administration that wants to deport as many people as possible. And luckily it was decided in the Supreme Court today that they have a responsibility to bring back people that they mistakenly deported to an El Salvadorian gulag. So that's good. Who knows what they're going to do? Are they going to create a robust program for undeporting people that they have deported? Almost certainly not. But at least in one specific case, the Trump administration has been ordered to do that. So that's good, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to continue aggressively pursuing this, because in that case, that was somebody who was just completely mistakenly deported, as in whatever it was that they thought was wrong with his residence. I don't believe he was a citizen, but he was a resident, and they deported him anyway. And so that's the pretense under which the Supreme Court has decided he has to be brought back. The idea that somebody who might be a green card holder or somebody who is a citizen who is just espousing anti-Israel sentiments, anti-Zionist sentiments, they're certainly going to try to deport people like that if they can. And I don't think that this case from the Supreme Court directly implicates their ability to do that, at least not yet. So there's at least a nice chunk of people that they're going to get away with deporting for their free speech, most likely. And almost certainly it's going to be the most vulnerable people who are immigrants from Muslim countries, obviously Palestinian immigrants, and any non-white country. Those are the people who are going to be deported first, as well as other immigrants from other European nations, etc. So what I want to do is I want to go through the things that Miss Rachel shared and said that Stop Anti-Semitism has specifically said are lies, and they provided their little bullshit debunks. So I'm going to go through every one of these claims and show that these things are true. Everything that she said is based in reality firmly, and Stop Anti-Semitism doesn't care about that. They simply want to silence free speech about the things that Israel is objectively doing. So the first claim that Stop Anti-Semitism said was false was Miss Rachel sharing an image of a child named Fadi Alzant, who was malnourished. And Rachel's post implied that was because of Israel and because of purposeful starving on Israel, which is documentedly taking place. Stop Anti-Semitism says that this is actually because of cystic fibrosis and not a case of starvation. However, while that is true that the child had cystic fibrosis, so that specific image was a child with that disorder, it is also true that the reason that child was in that condition is because he was being starved, and the reason he was being starved is because of Israel. So that has been confirmed by the Washington Post and other news outlets, who made it clear that while, yes, this child does have cystic fibrosis, he was also being starved by Israel. So that's an example of Stop Anti-Semitism using something that sounds like the truth, a fragment of the truth, to lie to as many people as possible and try to get somebody deported. The second thing that Rachel claimed was that 14,000 to 15,000 children have been killed in Gaza since October 7th. 14,000 to 15,000. So the only dispute that Stop Anti-Semitism has with those numbers is by saying that the Gaza Health Ministry does not distinguish between civilians and combatants. and that Hamas inflates the numbers. So there's no proof at all for the inflation of numbers. We've been hearing that from the beginning of this slaughter in Gaza, and all it has ever done, all that claim has ever done, is obscure us from getting any real information about how many people are being killed. And the real amount is undoubtedly in the hundreds of thousands. And they don't even dispute the fact that 14,000 to 15,000 children were killed. They just say that includes combatants. So, I mean, think about that. We're talking about children. We're talking about children. So even if we are supposedly talking about combatants, first of all, we're not talking about 14,000 to 15,000 children combatants, because that figure specifically refers to children. And they didn't provide any type of any type of number for how many innocent children have been killed, of which there are certainly many thousands. All they say is that this number includes combatants. Well, I don't care about that, because they are still children that have been killed by Israel, and the number is so far outsizing the number of Israeli children or innocents that have been killed that it just belies the Zionist complete disregard for life of innocents, children, and anybody else that's in Gaza. Another thing that Miss Rachel posted about was children dying from hypothermia during the winter in 2024 to 2025 because of the severe situations in refugee camps, again, being cut off from resources, being starved, something that Israel has been purposely, openly doing. There's really not any dispute to it. It's just a matter of if people are psychopathic enough to say that these are the kind of things you do in war. And Ms. Rachel is pointing out that children are dying because of this. Stop Anti-Semitism tried to dispute that by saying these are fake cold deaths and that the images were sourced from Wikipedia when the temperatures were warm. That was their dispute of that. But it is documented and true that Gaza experienced freezing temperatures between December 2024 and February 2025. And Doctors Without Borders reported newborn and child deaths from hypothermia, with specific cases like 10 newborns dying in a single week at Al-Aqsa Hospital due to cold exposure. So they're basically saying that because it gets warm in Gaza sometimes, that means that it is fake, that these children died from cold deaths. Again, completely ignoring the fact that sometimes it is nighttime and that people were completely displaced, cut off from any type of resources at all, and essentially left to die of exposure if they could get away from the bombing. Those are the undisputable conditions in Gaza for Gazans and Palestinians, no matter if they're combatants or not. And that led people to starving to death. So that's another claim that she made that is true. She also characterized what Israel is doing as indiscriminately bombing and killing hundreds of children, and then implored Israel to stop bombing children. So clearly, just an unacceptable message here from Miss Rachel. Stop bombing children is not the kind of hate speech that we can allow in a healthy society. But it looks like, despite the fact that Israel has claimed that their bombings in Gaza were precision targeting of Hamas, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the International Court of Justice have documented cases of strikes on civilian areas like schools, hospitals, safe zones, places where people were directed to go and set up tents and to escape, people who were refugees, people who were non-combatants, bombing those areas indiscriminately, you could say. And although Israel disputes that word, the use of the word indiscriminate, their behavior has not changed, certainly not since Trump came into office and completely took the reins off, to whatever extent they were even on at all with Biden. Now the pretense that Israel has to try to protect Palestinian lives is completely gone, and so they have only stepped up their indiscriminate murder. But what Stop Anti-Semitism is doing by trying to land on the word indiscriminate and saying that it's self-explanatory, that is incorrect to say and offensive to say, what they're trying to do is defer to the Israeli narrative, and the narrative that that Zionist purport is true when it comes to Israel's activity in Gaza, which is that they're targeted. They're not going after civilians. If they are going after civilians, it's because they have to, because Hamas is hiding behind civilians, or they were combatants anyway, or the numbers are inflated, whatever, what have you. But the point is that it's an alternate version of reality that Stop Anti-Semitism is just gesturing towards. And by just gesturing towards it and not getting into the details of it, a lot of people who want to believe that information in the first place are simply able to grasp onto that and accept it as true. The last thing, from what I can tell, that Stop Anti-Semitism accused Miss Rachel of is violating the Geneva Convention by blocking aid into Gaza. So she really just posted about the famine and aid shortages in Gaza and the fact that was being caused and exacerbated by Israel due to their blockade, which again, this is explicit policy of theirs. This is not something they're hiding. They were blockading aid. They were blockading aid into Gaza and allowing people to die. And Stop Anti-Semitism countered by saying that 1.7 million tons of aid were let into Gaza between October 2023 and the early part of 2025. However, that aid stopped as recently as March, and ever since then, they have not been letting aid into Gaza at all. And they claim that it's because Hamas is hoarding aid, but it's undeniable that by stopping aid from entering into Gaza, they are exposing all of these citizens to death conditions, and many of them would not be in that situation if it wasn't for Israel's blockade. That's simply the fact of the matter. So none of these things that Ms. Rachel said are false. All of these things are straightforwardly true. And all Stop Anti-Semitism is trying to do is gesture at a sort of alternate set of facts that is not supported by any international organizations or anything, and not only hope that that's a basis enough to convince people that they don't have to look any further into the types of claims that Ms. Rachel is making, but also she's hoping, and I say she because Stop Anti-Semitism is ran by a woman who was formerly in the IDF. Her name is Leora Rez, and there's no documented evidence that Israel is directly funding her operation, but I mean, it's pretty obvious she was formerly in the IDF, and she's pushing this type of narrative, which is not just there to try to root out the truth or root out people who are lying. It's straightforwardly to push the Israeli narrative at the expense of the truth and at the expense of many thousands of people's lives. So that's the project there, and she's hoping that flimsy basis of information is enough that the Trump DOJ will pursue charges, or I don't know, kidnap her in the dead of night, or do something to try to hamper her free speech. And I suspect at some point soon here we will probably see restrictions, or the government leaning on companies like Google and Facebook to restrict anti-Israel language and criticism even more than they already do in the name of anti-Semitism. So that's the final point that I want to leave you all with here, is that it has never been more important to speak out about Israel and about Israel's genocide in Gaza, because it is going now as strongly as it ever has. And like I said, Biden did not put a lot of guardrails on what Israel is allowed to do. In fact, there's reports now that even the Israeli military and the people making the decisions about what the military would do were shocked that Biden let them get away with what they were doing for so long. And so there's absolutely no excuse for that. But now it's even worse, straightforwardly, because to whatever extent Biden was asking Israel to be accountable to some idea of that they were indiscriminately murdering children, and to at least not make it look like that, Trump has completely taken the reins off, and he made it clear what he wants to allow Israel to do, which is to finish the job. He said it many times. And when you use that kind of language, and what you see is indiscriminate bombing of women and children and anybody, that is a genocide. And they're going after people like Miss Rachel. They're going after college students. They're going after anybody they can to try to tamp down this narrative. And I believe that was part of the deal that Trump made with Netanyahu, is he said, do this ceasefire for now so that we can, because companies like TikTok have allowed for the spread of information of what's going on in Gaza. And so once we take office, we are going to lean on those companies to stop them from doing that. And so we can get a hold of the narrative again. And Trump knows that that's not just a matter of controlling what the media operations say, but it's a matter of forcefully going after people who say things that the government doesn't want them to say. So, you know, those attacks are not going to stop. Those attacks on free speech are not going to stop. And, you know, if they're coming for Miss Rachel, then they could come for me and they could come for you. But the point is that now is the time to be as outspoken about that as possible, because the only way that that type of free speech is going to survive this assault is if as many people partake in it as possible and don't stop. And it's been important in the entire time. Like I said, way too many people have been murdered for just months and months and months and months. This has been going on, and there's no sign of it stopping, and it's as cruel as it ever was. So now's the time to speak up to it. Respect to Miss Rachel. She posted about how she has a new child, a second kid, I believe. That's amazing. She seems like she's handling this well. She should just continue to ignore it. And all of us should support her and others like her and the immigrants that have been kidnapped by Trump in any way we can. It is one of the most morally imperative issues on the table right now.